Tonight, you're not rushing or rehearsing tomorrow in your head. You're standing at the edge of a Norse forge, close enough to feel the heat breathe, close enough to hear how work has its own patience. Bellows sigh. Hot iron sings in a thin, steady note, and somewhere in the smoke, a fly's small buzz draws lazy circles, too small to matter, until it does. Before you fall asleep, you'll watch a joke of a wager turn into a night shift no one asked for. You'll see how real power in the story Ice and Thunder is craft. Measured hands, steady rhythm, no wasted motion. And you'll learn why Mjolnir's handle ends up short, not because the smiths failed, but because one stolen second can leave a permanent signature on perfect work. 3 small sounds to keep you company. Bellows sighing like an old house settling. Iron singing like it remembers fire. And that thin buzz insisting on being noticed. If your breathing starts to match the rhythm, perfect inhale 4, exhale 6. If nights like this help you unwind, you can subscribe only if you enjoy quiet myth told slowly. And tell me, in a whisper, where and what time are you listening from? Because this story doesn't begin with a battle. It begins with a mouth that promised too much, and a forge that never forgives timing. The funny thing about a legendary weapon is that it can be ruined by something as small as a mouth moving too quickly. Not a dragon, not a prophecy. Just a sentence that leaves someone's lips before their brain has finished putting on its boots. Somewhere in the dim warmth of a forge, bellows sigh the way an old house sighs when the heat finally reaches the far corner. Hot iron sings in a thin, steady note, like a kettle that never quite boils. Loki, of course, is the kind of person who treats words like they're free samples. He takes them. He offers them. He stacks them into little towers just to see if they fall. And he makes a wager that sounds charming right up until it becomes expensive, because he trusts his tongue to outrun consequences the way some people trust their phone battery to last until morning. It's not that Loki doesn't understand risk. He understands it very well. He simply finds it entertaining when risk wears a smile and walks into the room pretending to be a joke. The gods, hearing him, do what people always do when someone talks a little too confidently. They ask for proof. They want something made, something solid, something that can't be talked into existence. And so the story, sleepy and stubborn, wanders away from thrones and shining halls and into a place that smells like soot and patience. A forge is not a battlefield. It is a room where time is the loudest thing, and everything else is trying to keep up. Brocker and Sindri are there, 2 dwarf smiths with the calm focus of people who have never once been impressed by a dramatic speech. They work like surgeons, not because they're delicate, but because they're precise. Their hands do not waste movement. Their eyes do not chase distractions. They don't ask if something is mythic. They ask if it's done correctly, because metal only answers honesty. Iron does not care who you are. Gold does not flatter. It sits there and waits for you to get it right. And in a forge, small interruptions become big failures in the most boring way possible. Not with thunder, just with timing. A bellows slips. A rhythm stutters. A moment goes missing. You could almost call it the world's oldest lesson in process management, except nobody is making a chart. They're just trying to keep the heat steady while the work becomes itself. Loki watches them with the kind of attention that looks respectful until you realize it's curiosity with sharp edges. He understands this place. Not because he's patient, he isn't, but because he knows that patience is power in disguise. And he also knows something else, something quiet and almost admiring. Craft belongs to slow people who finish what they start. Trickery belongs to fast people who leave before the consequences arrive. The forge, inconveniently, does not let you leave. It holds you there with heat and routine, and the expectation that you will keep going. If you listen closely, you can hear it in the bellows, in out and out, a breath pattern for making something that lasts. Now, there's a particular kind of mischief that doesn't look like mischief at all. It looks like nothing. It looks like a second. Loki doesn't need strength today. He needs distraction. The kind that steals a heartbeat at the wrong moment, like a notification lighting up your screen when you swore you were done for the night. So he becomes small because small things are allowed everywhere. A fly is permitted near faces, near eyes, near sweat, near the tender edge of concentration, without needing an invitation or a reason. A fly doesn't knock. It simply appears, as if the air itself has decided to be mildly annoying. And in the soft haze above an anvil, with sparks lifting and fading like tiny, tired stars, Loki's buzzing is almost comically ordinary. That's the trick. The sabotage is quiet. It doesn't roar. It doesn't announce itself. It just leans in right where the focus lives and asks for a reaction. He bites, not like a monster, like a nuisance with a job description. The kind of bite that makes you blink, not because you're afraid, but because your body has a small, automatic habit of defending your attention. Eyelids, brows, the tender places that force a reflex. Brocker bleeds, and the blood is not dramatic, it's simply there. Warm and inconvenient, the way a paper cut is inconvenient. But he keeps pumping the bellows anyway because pride can be used like a tool when pain tries to take control. There's something almost soothing about that stubbornness, the way a craftsman refuses to look away, the way someone keeps stirring a pot even when a little steam stings their hand. Sindri watches the color of the metal the way sailors watch weather, refusing to blink for comfort. The room becomes a contest between irritation and discipline is the quieter one, which is why it often wins. And this is the part that feels strangely familiar, even if you've never stood near a forge in your life. Because everyone knows the small sabotage of a day, the tiny interruption that arrives with an innocent face, the buzzing thought, the itch, the urge to check something just for a second. Loki is simply turning that into a profession. The bellows keep breathing. The heat keeps its steady hunger. Tongs lift, set down, lift again. The anvil waits, patient as a stone. The metal is worked in a rhythm that feels almost like a lullaby, if lullabies were made of hammer taps and careful timing. And somewhere inside that rhythm, one stolen second is enough to make the hand hesitate. Not for long. Just long enough. So the hammer is made. Mjolnir is stillborn, mighty heavy, sure, meant to return because the craft is stronger than the sabotage. You can almost imagine it resting on a workbench, looking like an object that has never once considered being ordinary. And yet, when it comes out, the handle is short. Not ruined, exactly. Not weak. Just different. A flaw you can point to. A detail that feels like evidence. Proof that Loki was there, because Loki is the kind of presence that leaves fingerprints on the edges of things. The short handle isn't a tragedy, it's a signature. A tiny wrongness that becomes unforgettable, the way a slightly crooked smile becomes the only thing you remember about someone's face. There's also a quiet logic to a short handle, and it's the sort of logic that makes you yawn if you stare at it too long, which is perfect, really. A short handle changes how Thor grips, how he swings, how close he fights, turning power into something compact rather than sprawling. It makes the hammer intimate instead of distant, something you carry rather than something you set down like a pillar. It takes the idea of overwhelming strength and folds it neatly into a shape that fits in the hand, like turning a long speech into a single sentence that actually lands. And if you think about it in a very modern way, it's like the difference between a huge desktop setup and a small tool you can keep in your pocket. Both are powerful, but one makes you stand back, and the other makes you lean in. Even the gods learn this, eventually, in their slow, reluctant way. Not every imperfection reduces strength. Some imperfections redirect it. Some flaws are just design choices made by accident. Loki, hearing this, realizes a truth that would irritate him if he weren't already tired from being small and buzzing. Sabotage can accidentally improve the story. That's the most annoying outcome for a trickster because it turns mischief into contribution. It makes the mistake meaningful. It gives the flaw purpose. And purpose is dangerously close to responsibility, which Loki tends to avoid the way a cat avoids a bathtub. Still, there it is. The hammer exists. The short handle exists. And once something exists, it becomes stubborn. It becomes part of the world's furniture. You can't argue it away. You can only live with it. Under the anvil, the lesson is not really about Loki at all. It's about work. About the slow magic of repetition, about timing, about refusing to blink when it hurts, not because you enjoy pain, but because you are finishing what you started. Loki's genius is speak quick plans, quick lies, quick escapes, but craft belongs to the patient people who stay in the room. The forge shows a different kind of power, the kind that doesn't sparkle. It just persists, heat, soot, sweat. A tiny buzzing persistence that tries to ruin the rhythm, and a steady hand that insists the rhythm will continue anyway. If you want the myth to feel real, you don't stare at the hammer like it's a symbol. You stay with the sensory details, the smell of hot metal, the gritty soot on skin, the dull ache in the wrist, the way it bellows sounds like breathing in the dark. The myth's secret is not the weapon, it's the work. And as you settle, you can imagine that fly's buzz fading into the bellows, the forge cooling into a soft hush as the heat loosens its grip on the room. Hold one gentle thought, small enough to fit in your palm. The things that try to ruin you often arrive as tiny distractions you almost ignore. Not grand disasters, just little bites at the edge of focus. And maybe that's why it's comforting, in a strange way, to know that even in Asgard, even in a myth where gods throw lightning and call it normal, the biggest changes can come from something as small as a second. The fire dims. The anvil rests. Somewhere nearby, a short-handled hammer waits in the dark, heavy and quiet, ready to return whenever it's called. And the bellows, if you listen closely, still sound like breathing, as if the forge itself could keep going forever, slow and steady, without needing an ending. There is a special kind of silence that only exists inside a forge when everyone has agreed, without saying it out loud, that talking is an inefficient hobby. It isn't the silence of an empty room. It's the silence of a room that is busy. Heat is working, metal is working, breath is working. Even the soot is doing its quiet job of settling onto everything, like a tired blanket that insists on touching every surface. And in that hush, the wager Loki made starts to feel less like a joke and more like a shift you can clock out of. Not because anyone is yelling or threatening or dramatically pointing at anything. Just because the forge has its own law, and the law is simple. If you start a thing, you finish it, or you carry the unfinished weight forever. Brocker and Sindri don't greet the gods with speeches. They greet them with the same look a craftsman gives a crooked shelf. Calm, mildly offended, and already imagining how to fix it. Their faces don't say, welcome. Their faces say, be quiet. And this, honestly, is one of the more restful philosophies in the 9 worlds. No grand declarations, no poetic introductions. Just work arranged in a sequence of small actions that make sense. Tools placed where a hand expects them. Tongues hung at a height that doesn't make the shoulder complain. A hammer chosen for its balance, not its bragging rights. The forge itself feels organized in a way that makes your eyelids heavier, like watching someone fold laundry with perfect, unhurried precision. It's almost hypnotic. Even the fire seems to behave better in a room like this, as if it knows it's being supervised. They work like surgeons, which is to say they don't waste movement. They don't reach past what they need. They don't suddenly decide to wing it, as if the laws of heat can be charmed by confidence. Brocker pumps the bellows with a steady rhythm that sounds like a calm chest rising and falling in sleep. In, out, in, out. Sindri watches the metal the way someone watches a kettle, not impatient, just alert to the exact moment when the world shifts from not yet to now. And there's something strangely comforting about how unromantic it is. In stories, everyone wants magic to sparkle. In real work, magic is mostly timing. The difference between a masterpiece and a mistake can be the length of a blink, which is also the length of time it takes to think, I wonder if I left the door unlocked. If you look closely, you can tell they've made mistakes before. Not because they're sloppy, but because they've built a life around preventing the same mistake twice. The floor has marks where hot metal fell long ago, and no one remembers the incident because the lesson is already baked into their habits. The water bucket is placed just far enough away that it doesn't get kicked, but close enough that it doesn't require a dramatic jog. The quench tank looks like it's been cleaned out of pure stubbornness, the way someone cleans their kitchen at midnight because they cannot bear waking up to a mess. And the anvil's plural, because of course there are plural anvils sit like patient animals, each one meant for a slightly different kind of task. A smaller anvil for delicate shaping, a heavier one for the kind of hit that travels through bone and into the soul. If anvils had personalities, these would be quiet ones, the kind that never ask questions. Loki, in the corner of all this competence, looks like a person trying to tell a joke in a library. He understands that craft is the one thing even tricksters respect, because craft can't be faked for long. You can lie to a god, you can confuse an oath, you can spin a story, but you can't lie to metal when it's hot. Metal listens only to what you do, not what you claim you meant. And Brocker and Sindri don't ask if something is mythic, they ask if it's correct. It's almost boring, it's almost rude, and that's what makes it powerful. Their honesty is the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. It just keeps doing its job. The forge has a smell that clings to the back of the throat. Charcoal, hot iron, old sweat, damp stone. If you imagine it long enough, you can almost taste it like the world's driest tea, brewed from determination. And mixed into that is the tiny, comforting smell of routine. Oil on tools, leather, a faint sour note from smoke that has lived in the beams so long it feels like part of the architecture. The ceiling is dark with years of labor, and the darkness is not ominous. It's just evidence. If anyone tries to tell you the gods are only defeated by monsters, you could bring them here and show them the truth. Everyone is defeated occasionally by fatigue and the need to keep going anyway. Even gods, apparently, are not immune to the humble problem of we promised something and now we have to deliver it. The bellows keep breathing, and it's hard not to fall into that rhythm yourself. And for out 6, if you want to pretend you're doing something wise, a forge encouraged this kind of accidental meditation. Not because it's spiritual, because it's repetitive. Because the body loves repetition when the mind is tired. And if you're still awake, only if you're still awake, feel free to subscribe. Or don't. The forge won't judge you. It will just quietly remember you were here, the way soot remembers everything it touches. Sindri turns the metal with a pair of tongs that look simple until you notice how perfectly they grip. They were made by someone who got tired of dropping things. Brocker adjusts the airflow without even looking at his hands, which is the kind of skill you only get by doing the same motion so many times it becomes part of your nervous system. Somewhere in the corner, a small stack of charcoal sits ready, arranged like someone actually cares about tomorrow. The fire's glow turns everything soft and amber, like a room lit by a lamp you forgot to turn off. And every time the metal is brought out and struck, there's a brief crisp sound, then the softer after sound, the tiny vibration that fades into the stone. It is like the forge is teaching you how to listen to endings that aren't dramatic, just gentle fading. What makes this place unforgiving isn't cruelty, it's physics. Heat does not negotiate. Time does not bend because you're having a moment. If you pull the metal out too early, it fights you like stubborn dough. If you wait too long, it cools and becomes uncooperative, like a friend who has decided they're done socializing for the night. Timing is everything. not in a poetic sense, in the plainest, most practical sense. And this is why small interruptions are dangerous here. Not because they're scary, because they're small. Because you think you can ignore them. Because you think you can blink and lose nothing. The Forge politely disagrees. Brocker and Sindri have the kind of discipline that makes you want to whisper, how? But you don't, because you can tell they would answer with something dull like practice and then keep working. Their craft is a kind of refusal, the refusal to rush, the refusal to be distracted, the refusal to believe that a good outcome should be easy, and there's an odd comfort in that. It suggests that stability is not a miracle, it's maintenance. The gods, up in their bright halls, often treat power like a permanent setting. The dwarves treat it like a habit, like sharpening a blade, like checking the hinge on a door before it starts squeaking, like eating, sleeping, drinking water, doing the small things that keep the big things possible. It's almost embarrassingly relatable for a myth. If you want a soft, mildly strange detail to hold on to, consider this. Dwarves in these stories are often portrayed as master craftsmen who live under mountains, which means their day-night cycle is flexible. Their morning might be whenever they decide the fire is ready. Their evening might be whenever their arms start feeling like they belong to someone else. Time in a forge is measured in heats, in colors, and how the metal responds. It's not Tuesday at 3. It's the moment the iron turns the right shade of bright orange. A forge doesn't care what hour it is. It cares what temperature you are. Which, frankly, sounds like a healthier way to live if you ignore the part where everything is constantly trying to burn you. And Loki understands all of this, which is exactly why he becomes interested in the smallest weapon possible. Not a spear, not a sword, not a grand, obvious disruption. He chooses something that fits into the gaps where attention lives. He chooses the idea of interruption itself. And while you could call that sinister, it's also petty. It's the kind of sabotage that feels like it belongs in a domestic argument. Like moving someone's keys just slightly so they spend an extra 30 seconds searching. Like leaving a cupboard door open so someone bumps their head later. It's not thunder. It's inconvenience, weaponized. And somehow that is even more Norse than the dramatic stuff, because the world is often shaped by small annoyances repeated over time. The forge continues, indifferent to psychology. Brocker keeps the bellows steady, his forearms doing the same motion until it becomes a lullaby. Sindri keeps his gaze on the work, the way a person keeps their gaze on the road during the long night drive, quietly alert, not tense, just committed. Their faces don't show excitement. They show attention. And attention is a kind of tenderness in its own boring way. It's what you give to something you want to survive, not loudly, just consistently. Sometimes when you watch skilled people work, you realize that their real talent is not strength, it's restraint. They don't swing harder than needed. They don't add heat just because they're impatient. They don't take shortcuts because shortcuts feel like progress. They accept that progress is mostly repetition. They accept that craft is the slow accumulation of tiny correct choices. This is why the Forge doesn't forgive mistakes, not because it's mean, but because it's honest. If you choose wrong, the result simply shows it, and showing it is enough. The gods in the background of this scene are almost comically out of place. Imagine a group of powerful, dramatic beings standing in a workshop where the most important thing is not speaking too loudly. Imagine Thor big, loud Thor trying to understand that a single careless moment can ruin hours of work. Imagine Odin, who loves wisdom, watching a lesson delivered without poetry. Imagine someone like Freya, used to beauty, noticing how beautiful routine can be when it's done well. The dwarves don't flatter them. They don't fear them. They treat them like clients who are dangerously likely to complain, and that's about it. And if you've ever dealt with a difficult customer, you know that calm professionalism is its own kind of shield. The heat rises and falls in controlled breaths. The metal is shaped a little at a time, each strike part of a conversation between hammer and glowing surface. It's not a loud conversation. It's a steady one. And the more you settle into it, the more the forge begins to feel like a world you could live inside if you didn't mind the constant risk of singed eyebrows. The soundscape is repetitive in the most soothing way. Bellows, strike, hiss, quiet. Bellows, strike, hiss, quiet. Even the sparks behave like sleepy fireflies, appearing, drifting, disappearing, as if they too are trying not to cause a fuss. And somewhere within this careful rhythm, Loki's wager lingers like an unpaid tab. He said too much. He promised too much, and now the world is correcting him in the dullest way possible, through labor, through the patient refusal of the forge to be rushed, through the steady hands of dwarves who have no interest in his charm. It's almost comforting, isn't it, to imagine that even the cleverest mouth eventually meets a room where words don't matter. A room where only the next small, correct movement matters. A room where the only way out is through. So the forge keeps working, the bellows keep breathing, the anvils keep waiting, and the tiny, quiet truth sinks in like warmth into cold fingers. This is where the myth becomes real. Not in the moment a hammer is lifted in triumph, but in the long, repetitive hours where someone refuses to blink at the wrong time, where someone keeps their hand steady, where someone treats time like a tool and uses it properly. And as the heat and soot and routine continue, the scene doesn't end so much as it softens, still busy, still humming, still alive, like the kind of steady background that can carry you gently toward sleep without ever needing to announce, "Now we are finished." You might not expect the fate of a thunder god, his most famous tool, to depend on something as small as a fly, but that's the point of it, really. Not every myth turns on a roar. Some myths turn on a buzz, a thin, ordinary sound that slides through heat and smoke the way a stray thought slides through your mind right when you were trying to fall asleep. The forge is already full of big things: fire, iron, patience. The steady breathing of bellows, so the oddest power in the room is the thing nobody invited and nobody can quite swat. And Loki, being Loki, notices this. He doesn't choose a grand weapon. He chooses permission. He chooses what the world already tolerates. There's a quiet comedy in the fact that a fly is allowed everywhere. A fly can land on a king's bread. A fly can explore the edge of a god's eyelid with the confidence of a tourist. A fly can stroll across a warm amble like it owns the place, as if it's simply checking the quality of the metal for personal reasons. No one opens the door for it. No one says, "Please come in. We could really use more tiny interruptions today." It just arrives. It behaves like it has an appointment. It is small enough to be ignored, and that is the special trick of small things. They get away with more because confronting them feels like admitting defeat. And if you're still awake right now, you can do the same kind of small thing. You can subscribe or don't. It's fine. Either way, no one in the forge will clap. They'll just keep working and you'll keep listening, and the world will continue doing what it does, which is mostly repeating itself in softer and softer patterns. Loki becomes a fly because a fly fits into the gaps where the rules get blurry. A giant has rules. A warrior has rules. A god has rules. Even a trickster, when he's standing in a forge full of serious people, suddenly has rules. But a fly is practically made of loopholes. A fly can approach without being approached. A fly can hover in front of someone's face and somehow make it feel like it was your fault for having a face. The air in the forge is thick with heat, and you might think a fly wouldn't like it there, but flies are creatures of persistence. They don't demand comfort. They demand opportunity. And opportunity in a forge is abundant. Sweat, warmth, blinking eyes. The brief moment when someone's focus shifts just a fraction toward annoyance. This is the strange, sleepy logic of sabotage that looks like nothing. You don't need to break the bellows. You don't need to kick over the coal. You don't need to curse the anvil with dramatic words that echo into the rafters. You just need to steal a second. You just need to nudge the rhythm. A forge is a place where rhythm is everything. The bellows breathe, the metal heats, the hammer strikes, the tongs turn. It's a calm cycle, almost like someone rocking a cradle. And Loki's plan is not to smash the cradle. It's to tap it at the wrong time, so the rocking becomes slightly uneven, so the hand hesitates, so the breath stutters. If you've ever tried to do something careful while your phone keeps lighting up with notifications, you already understand this myth in a very modern way. Not because Loki had a phone, obviously. He would have loved one, though. He would have been unbearable. No, the point is that distraction doesn't have to be loud to be effective. Distraction only has to be persistent. It only has to arrive at the exact moment your attention is most needed, like a tiny creature with perfect timing and no shame. The fly circles through the smoke in slow loops, and it's almost peaceful if you forget what it's doing. The smoke in a forge isn't dramatic like a battlefield. It's domestic smoke. It's the kind of smoke that sticks to rafters, that makes wood look older, that turns everything into a familiar shade of, this place has been used. The fly draws little patterns in it, thin arcs that vanish as soon as they're made, like someone doodling in the margin of a very serious book. And Loki, inside that small body, is not powerful in the usual sense. He's not lifting mountains, he's not throwing spears. He's just hovering, listening for the moment when concentration becomes fragile. It's almost tender, in a strange way, how much this myth respects craft. The dwarves are not defeated by strength. They're threatened by interruption. They are threatened by the simple human and divine fact that focus has edges. Focus can be pulled. Focus can be pinched. Focus can be tired out the way a candle can be blown at again and again, until it finally flickers. The forge does not forgive mistakes because the forge is honest, and honesty is exhausting. It asks you to be present for every second of the work. Loki's fly doesn't change the laws of the forge. It just makes being present slightly harder. At first, the sabotage is so small it could be mistaken for nothing. A tiny buzz near the ear. A soft touch of feet on skin. The faint suggestion that something is hovering too close to an eye. These are not dramatic events. They're barely events at all. They are the kind of annoyances you deal with on a warm evening when you were trying to sleep with the window open. You don't panic. You don't make speeches. You just shift, swat, sigh, try to settle again. That's the rhythm Loki is trying to ruin. The settling. The return to calm. The fly goes where flies always go, toward the places that can't be ignored. Near eyes, because eyes must blink. Near brows, because brows flinch. Near the tender edge of focus, where a person's attention narrows down into something delicate and exact. It's a strangely intimate kind of attack, if you can call it that. Not the intimacy of romance, or friendship, or even conversation. The intimacy of being close enough to someone's face that they can to pretend you were not there. And the absurdity of it is that the fly itself is almost laughable. It's small. It's fragile. It is a creature you could end with one good slap, if you didn't mind slapping yourself in the process. Loki has chosen the one form where victory looks like irritation. Brocker keeps pumping the bellows. In, out, and out. He does it the way someone keeps breathing through a headache, stubbornly, steadily, refusing to let discomfort become the boss of the room. The bellows are like lungs made of leather and willpower. They pull air into the fire, and the fire answers with heat, not with gratitude. The metal sits in that heat, changing color in slow, patient stages, dark to dull red to bright red toward that hot orange that says, quietly, now. If you watch it long enough, it starts to feel like watching the sky at sunset, except the sunset is inside a box and it can burn you. And then, right at the moment when now matters, a fly appears at the brow. a small prick, a reflex, a blink that happens without permission, not because anyone chose it, but because bodies have their own rules. Bodies protect eyes. Bodies flinch when something sharp touches skin. It's not cowardice, it's wiring. Even dwarves, who are all discipline and muscle memory, still have nerves, still have skin, still have that ancient, stubborn reflex that says, something is on my face and I do not consent. It's not a huge injury. This isn't a story about heroic suffering. It's a story about the kind of irritation that makes you say, under your breath, really? Now, Brocker bleeds a little because brows are dramatic like that. They don't bleed politely. They bleed as if they want everyone to know they've been inconvenienced. And the blood is warm against the heat of the forge, and it's such a small thing, such a ridiculous thing to matter in a room full of blazing fire. But small things matter here. A drop of sweat in the eye matters. A blink matters. A single stolen second matters. Sindri watches the metal the way sailors watch weather, refusing to look away for comfort. He doesn't want to blink at the wrong time. He doesn't want to turn his head and lose the color. A forge teaches you that color is information. You don't need prophecies when you can read the glow of iron, you don't. Do you need a poem when you can see the exact shade that says the metal will bend instead of crack? And this is why the fly is so perfectly chosen. It doesn't challenge strength. It challenges attention. It tries to make the eyes do something other than watch. There's a small, quiet conflict in the room now, and it isn't between gods and dwarves. It's between irritation and discipline, between the body's reflex and the mind's insistence, between the fly's persistence and the craftsman's patience. And because this is a sleepy story, it doesn't spike into excitement. It just hums, like the fly itself, like the forge. Like the steady, repetitive labor that continues even when something annoying is trying to narrate itself into the foreground. Loki keeps buzzing. That's the other secret. It's not just the bite. It's the sound that says, I'm still here. The sound that taps at the edge of your awareness the way a dripping faucet does in the middle of the night. You can ignore it for a while. You can pretend it isn't happening. But the longer it continues, the more your mind starts counting it. The more your attention keeps checking in on it, like a worried parent peeking into a room. That checking in is the sabotage, not the fly. The checking in, and the forge keeps going anyway. The bellows keep breathing. The hammer keeps its calm, heavy schedule. The metal continues becoming what it's meant to become, not because the world is fair, but because craft is stubborn. Craft has a way of continuing through minor disasters. People spill things, tools slip, eyebrows bleed. And still, someone does the next step. Someone adjusts, compensates, keeps going. There's something quietly reassuring about that. The myth is telling you, in the softest possible way, that perfection isn't the default. Work happens in real conditions. Work happens while flies exist. If you want another mildly strange thought to hold on to, consider how many Norse stories include shapeshifting and how often the shapeshifting is practical. Loki doesn't become a fly because it's majestic. He becomes a fly because it's useful. Odin becomes a bird because it helps him see and travel. Freya has a feathered cloak that turns her into a falcon because sometimes you just want a faster commute. Even the gods, with all their cosmic drama, still run into problems that are solved by being small, being quick, being unnoticed. It's almost like the mythology understands that power is not only about being bigger. Sometimes power is being able to slip through a crack in a door without making the hinge complain. And as the fly keeps doing its tiny work, the room stays strangely calm. No one screams, no one flips a table, no one declares a war on insects. They simply endure the way you endure a sock seam that feels wrong, or a tag on a shirt that scratches, or a neighbor's music that is just quiet enough to make you doubt whether you were actually hearing it. Endurance is not glamorous. Endurance is repetitive. Endurance is a series of small decisions to keep your hands steady anyway. The sabotage continues to look like nothing, and that's what makes it exhausting. If Loki threw a rock, you could point to the rock. If Loki set the forge on fire more fire, you could react with certainty. But a fly is a question, a fly is a maybe. A fly is something you argue with yourself about. Is it worth dealing with? Did it really bite me? Am I imagining that buzzing? That internal debate is where focus goes to die gently, 1 second at a time. So the fly drifts in its circles. The smoke carries it like a lazy river carries a leaf. The heat shimmers in the air, softening the edges of everything. Sweat collects and slides and evaporates. Metal glows and darkens and glows again. The dwarves do what they do best, which is not to be impressed by chaos. Loki does what he does best, which is to find the smallest seam in someone as concentration and worry it like a loose thread. And the gods, somewhere beyond the forge, remain the kind of audience that expects grand outcomes from small rooms. And if your eyes are getting heavy, that's appropriate. The story is not in a hurry. It doesn't need you to stay alert like a guard at a gate. It only needs you to drift alongside it, listening to the soft logic of tiny interruptions, the way a lullaby repeats the same few notes until your mind stops trying to follow and simply rests. The fly is still there. The forge is still breathing. The work is still continuing in slow, careful steps. And the next moment, whenever it arrives, will be shaped by something as ordinary as a blink, as patient as a hand that refuses to tremble, as quiet as a small buzz that never quite becomes silence. Under an anvil, the world becomes very small. Not small in a sad way, just small in a practical way. Like a kitchen counter at midnight when you're making tea and trying not to wake anyone. The forge has its own nighttime manners. The fire is still bright, but it behaves now, settling into a steady glow instead of showing off. The air smells like metal that has been persuaded to change its mind. And the anvil sits there with the calm confidence of something that never has to explain itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't brag. It simply waits to be useful again. This is where the myth gets quietly honest about Loki. Loki's genius is speed quick plans, quick lies, quick exits, like someone who always knows which door is easiest to slip through. But a forge is not a place that rewards slipping. A forge rewards staying. The dwarves don't win because they are loud or dramatic. They win because they can repeat the same motion without getting bored of themselves. They can keep the bellows breathing even when their brow stings. They can keep watching color changes in metal the way you might watch water come to a boil patiently, stubbornly, almost tenderly. It's the kind of attention that feels boring from the outside, but from the inside it's a whole discipline, like meditation with sit on it. And this is the funny part in the soft way. Loki tries to ruin the work with something tiny and annoying, and the work responds by becoming even more stubborn. The forge has a different kind of magic, repetition, timing, and the refusal to blink when it hurts. Not because blinking is forbidden, but because blinking at the wrong moment costs you something. In that room, a moment is not a poetic word. It's a measurable thing. It is the difference between a handle that comes out exactly as intended and a handle that comes out a little too short. It's the difference between clean strikes and a rhythm that stutters once, very quietly, and leaves a mark behind. If you've ever tried to write a message while your screen keeps scrolling, or cook something while someone keeps asking questions, you already understand this lesson in a modern, sleepy way. Distraction isn't always dramatic. Sometimes distraction is just the world tapping your shoulder, again and again, until your brain starts doing that little tired thing where it keeps checking the sound, checking the itch, checking the thought like a night watchman who can't stop pacing. Loki doesn't need to break the anvil. He only needs to make the mind step slightly sideways. And yet the mind, when it's trained, can step back into place. It can return to the work the way you return to your breathing when you notice you've wandered. The dwarf's craft isn't glamorous, but it has a kind of dignity that even gods notice. It's the dignity of finishing what you start, It's also the dignity of not pretending you're above small problems. A fly on your brow is not a cosmic enemy. It's just a fly. But in a forge, even a fly can become a factor, and it's strangely comforting to admit that. Even divine stories leave room for ordinary annoyances. Even myths admit that perfection is sensitive. And then, even better, they admit that perfection isn't the only goal. Sometimes the flaw becomes the signature. Sometimes the imperfect handle becomes the detail everyone remembers, because it proves the story happened in real conditions, with real nerves and real blinking eyes and real irritation trying to sit at the table. So the lesson under the anvil is not really about Loki winning or losing. It's about how craft behaves when trickery visits. Trickery arrives fast and expects the world to keep up. Craft arrives slow and doesn't care who's impressed. Craft just keeps doing the next step. Heat, turn, strike, turn again, cool, check the balance, repeat. It is almost like the forge is teaching a bedtime truth without making a big speech about it. The things that last are often made by people who can tolerate being bored without becoming careless. And when the work begins to wind down, the whole room softens. The bellows sigh the way you sigh when you finally find a comfortable position. The iron stops singing and starts cooling into a darker, quieter self. The fly's buzz becomes less important, not because it disappears in a heroic defeat, but because the air itself is changing, growing calmer, less hungry. The anvil rests. The tools settle. Even irritation gets tired. Even sabotage loses momentum when the night gets heavy enough. If you want a small oath to carry into sleep, let it be something gentle and almost silly, because the gods themselves live on small rituals. Hold one thought in a simple jar. The things that try to ruin your focus often arrive in tiny costumes. A buzz, a notification. A stray worry that insists it's urgent even though it never is at this hour. You don't have to fight it like a warrior. You can treat it like a fly in a warm room. Notice it. Let it pass. Return to your breathing. Return to your quiet. In 4, out 6, slow, steady, as if you're pumping bellows for a fire that doesn't need to roar anymore. And somewhere in the dim forge of the mind, the hammer still exists, heavy and real. The short handle still waits in the dark like a proof of one imperfect moment. The anvil still knows how to be patient. The room cools into a softer hush. The last thin buzz fades into the background, not with an ending, just with a gradual, ordinary quiet, like a thought drifting away before it finishes, like a story that could keep going but doesn't need to, because sleep is already doing its slow, careful work. You might think the most dramatic thing in Valhalla would be the fighting, or the shouting, or the heroic speeches that make everyone sit up straighter. But the truth is softer than that. The strangest thing about Valhalla is how quickly endless glory starts to feel like a routine you can do half asleep. A hall can be enormous and still have the gentle note of a place that's been lived in for a long time. The roof beams are old with story. The benches know exactly how much weight they can hold. The air smells like wood warmed by bodies and like metal that has been put down carefully instead of thrown. And somewhere, always somewhere, there is food being prepared again, because eternity is hungry in a very ordinary way. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Let the night keep its soft borders. And if you're listening from a place where the world is loud, then let this be a small quiet corner you can borrow for a while. Where and what time are you listening from? It's a gentle question, the kind you don't have to answer out loud. You can just let it sit beside you like a cup of water on a bedside table. And if you're still awake in a few minutes, you can always subscribe. Or don't. I'll never know. Valhalla will keep cooking either way, like a dependable kitchen that doesn't take feedback personally. In Valhalla, the doorways are wide enough for legends, but the daily life is made of smaller details. The kind of details that wouldn't look impressive in a painting. The scrape of a bench being nudged back into place. The soft clink of a cup set down without drama. The way someone runs a thumb over the rim of a horn to check if it has chipped. The way a shield can be both a symbol and, when you're tired enough, a surprisingly decent tray. Odin's hall is full of people who once lived for intensity, and now, night after night, they sit under that high roof and learn the art of repetition. They eat, they drink, they talk, they laugh in a way that doesn't have sharp edges anymore, and then they do it again. Eternity, it turns out, is mostly scheduling. There's a cook in this place, and he is not presented like a roaring hero. He is presented like a professional. His name is Andrimner, and the fact that anyone remembers it at all is already a compliment. Most kitchens swallow names. In Valhalla, the cook's name survives because the task is absurd in a quiet way. Every evening, the same animal is cooked. Every evening, it tastes good. Every evening, it is somehow whole again by morning, ready to be cooked again. The boar is called Shrimnur, which sounds like it should be shouted across a battlefield, but is more likely to be muttered with sleepy affection by someone carrying a pot. And the cauldron has a name too, because of course it does. Eldrimner. Fire-soothed, fire-friendly, the kind of vessel that has seen so much heat it no longer fears it. Sometimes it helps to name your tools. It makes your work feel less like a punishment and more like a relationship. The way people name their cars. The way people name their favorite mug in their head and never admit it. The kitchen of Valhalla is not quiet exactly, but it has a steady sound. A dependable sound, the kind that makes your eyelids feel heavier because nothing surprising is happening. Knife on board, ladle and pot. The low hiss of something hot meeting something wet. Andrimner moves like someone who has done this so many times that his thoughts can drift without ruining anything. His hands are practicing a kind of prayer, except the prayer is mostly about not spilling. There is a particular peace that comes from being very good at a simple thing. And there is a particular humor too, in realizing that the grand hall of slain warriors depends on one person knowing when the broth is ready. The micro-miracle of Shrimnur is not the coming back to life part. That's myth business. Myth does that. The micro-miracle is the consistency. Imagine feeding a hall full of people every night and having the meal come out reliably satisfying. Imagine never having a day where the boar is a little dry or weirdly salty or tough for some reason. Imagine never getting that apologetic look from a cook that says, "It was better yesterday." In Valhalla, yesterday and today are folded together like linen. The boar returns, the pot is filled, the ladle knows the way. You could almost call it the world's most eternal meal prep plan, if you wanted to insult the gods very gently. Outside this kitchen, the hall itself holds its own small wonders. There is a goat named Hyren who lives up on the roof, which already sounds like the beginning of a joke, and it is, but it is also treated as completely normal. She feeds on the leaves of a tree, Lerar, if you like your details official, and from her udders comes mead. Not a little mead, enough mead to keep the hall's cups filled, night after night, without anyone having to do math about it. And it's funny, if you let it be funny in a soft way, that the drink of warriors comes from a goat doing her quiet work above their heads, like a rooftop water tank that happens to be mythological. If you've ever lived in a building with strange plumbing, you already have a modern analogy. The system is mysterious. The outcome is comforting. You do not ask too many questions because you enjoy the results. And still, even with endless mead, there are chores. There's always the gentle, boring truth that a feast creates mess. A myth can give you a self-renewing boar and a meat goat, but it does not always give you self-washing dishes. Maybe it does, somewhere in some version, but if it does, it probably still requires someone to stack them correctly. Because even magic, when it's used for domestic life, becomes a system. Systems have steps. Steps have order. Order is what keeps a hall from turning into chaos. And Valhalla is many things, but it is not careless. So picture the end of the feast, when the talk has softened to that tired, happy murmur. The benches are warm. The floor is littered with small, harmless evidence. Crumbs, a dropped onion skin, a little line of salt, like someone's hand shook once and then forgot to correct it. Someone wipes a blade on a cloth with a sigh that is more content than dramatic. Someone else rubs their eyes like a person who has been up too long but refuses to admit they re-sleepy, even though they have literally died and been brought to the world's most famous afterlife lounge. In the corner, a pile of cups waits. Horns, beakers, bowls, whatever form the drinking takes, it always ends the same way. Something needs to be cleaned. And the funny part is that no one becomes legendary for doing it. They become legendary for other things, but the cleaning still happens because the next evening is always arriving. There is also the steady rhythm of the Valkyries, who are not only choosers of the slain, but also, very practically, servers. It's a gentle downgrade for anyone expecting constant divine drama. Sometimes a Valkyrie is a winged symbol of fate. Sometimes she is just walking between benches, balancing a tray with the kind of careful attention you use when carrying soup. You can be divine and still spill if you don't focus. The hall teaches that lesson over and over. Greatness does not protect you from gravity. And gravity, like a boring manager, does not care how important you are. Now, there is a temptation to make this story louder, to turn it into an epic, to talk about roaring voices and clashing cups and wild joy. But the sleepy truth is nicer. The joy in Valhalla is stable. It doesn't need to prove itself. It's the joy of people who have stopped worrying about tomorrow's deadlines, because tomorrow is the same meal, the same hall, the same soft reassurance that they belong here. And there is something deeply calming about that, even if you are not a warrior and have never held a shield in your life. Everyone understands the comfort of a predictable evening. Everyone understands the feeling of knowing what comes next and not having to perform surprise. In the middle of the night, when the hall finally quiets, you can imagine the kitchen cooling down. The coals sink into themselves like tired eyes. The pots are scrubbed until their surfaces reflect a dim, wavering light. Andrumner might lean against the wall for a moment, not as a dramatic rest, but as the kind of small rest you take when your body reminds you exists. The smell of cooked meat fades into the smell of smoke and damp wood. Somewhere above, the goat continues being a goat, which is to say, she continues unbothered, providing what she provides, without needing applause. And somewhere, the boar is already becoming whole again, quietly, as if the world itself is knitting him back together while everyone else drifts. A small, mildly strange thought wanders in at this point, as it tends to do when you're sleepy. What does endless taste like after a while? Does it start to taste ordinary? Do the warriors ever sit there, staring into their bowls, and think, in the most private way, I miss something different? Maybe, or maybe Valhalla adjusts you. Maybe it teaches you to appreciate sameness. The way a lullaby is the same song every night, and that's why it works. The way repetition becomes a soft cushion for the mind. The way you're breathing, steady and boring, is actually the most loyal rhythm you have. And if the mind wants a micro hook, a tiny piece of odd trivia to keep it from falling too hard into silence, it can have one. Odin's Hall is said to have many doors, so many that armies can flow out of them without squeezing. And yet, in a place with endless doors, people still sit in the same spots. They still have their bench. They still have their cup. They still have a preferred corner where the draft is gentler. Immensity doesn't erase habit. Immensity just gives habit a bigger room to echo in. Maybe that's the quiet lesson here, the one that doesn't need a conclusion. The gods may deal in huge themes, fate, age, battle, prophecy, but they also deal in small systems that keep life and afterlife comfortable. Someone keeps the pot clean. Someone keeps the mead flowing. Someone notices when the fire needs less air. Someone sets the cups down without clattering. And in the middle of all that, the soul relaxes because it recognizes the shape of home. Not your exact home, of course. Most homes do not have roof goats producing mead. Most homes do not cook the same boar every night forever. But the feeling is familiar. A world that keeps going gently, with rituals that don't demand excitement. So let this story drift the way steam drifts from a bowl. Let it thin out without vanishing all at once. Let the hall's huge roof become a dim thought. Let the kitchen's warmth become a softer warmth in your own chest. And if something small tries to distract you, an itch, a thought, a worry that wants to buzz near your mind like an annoying fly treated, the way Valhalla treats eternity, with steady repetition. In 4, out 6, again, again. Not dramatic, not heroic, just consistent. The benches settle, the cups rest, the fire goes low. The goat continues her quiet work above the roofline. The boar quietly becomes whole again. And the hall, enormous and oddly domestic, sinks into a calm that doesn't end. It just keeps dimming softly like a lamp turned down one careful notch at a time. There is a particular kind of irony in a weapon that becomes famous not only for its power, but for the one small thing you can point to and say very calmly, "This is where it went a little wrong." The short handle on Thor's hammer is like that. It's the myth's most polite flaw. It doesn't scream. It doesn't shatter the story. It just sits there quietly, like a missing button on an otherwise perfect coat, making everyone notice the coat a little more. Because perfection can be easy to forget, but a small imperfection has a way of anchoring itself in the mind the way a tiny scratch on a phone screen becomes the only thing you see once you know it's there. And when you let the idea settle, when you stop treating the short handle like a mistake and start treating it like a design feature the universe accidentally invented, you can feel how the whole myth changes texture. A long-handled hammer is a tool of distance. It's leverage. It's a wide arc. It's the kind of swing that asks for space, the way a person asks for room when they're carrying something awkward through a doorway. A short-handled hammer is different. It's closer. It's intimate. It belongs to the wrists more than the shoulders. It turns power into something you can keep near your body, like a secret you can hold in one hand without needing to announce it. In a forge, the handle length matters in the most boring, practical ways. It changes where your weight sits. It changes how tired your forearm gets. It changes how much control you have when the metal is stubborn and you need the strike to land exactly where you want it, not half a finger width away. So imagine the odd calm of a hammer that is not only a weapon, but also a lesson in ergonomics, delivered by a myth that usually prefers grand gestures. Mjolnir, with its short handle, is not only the mighty hammer, it's also the mighty hammer that makes you stand closer to your work. That closeness is the quiet logic. Thor doesn't swing from far away like a man chopping down a tree. He swings like someone driving a wedge, like someone cracking stone, like someone doing a job that requires precision as much as strength. A shorter handle makes the movement tighter. The arc is smaller. The timing is quicker. And the hammer's weight does more of the talking. You don't need a long story in the swing. You just need the decision, the grip, the moment of contact. In a world where Loki tried to ruin the rhythm by stealing seconds, it's almost funny that the result is a weapon that thrives on shortened rhythms. Loki sabotages the timing, and the hammer becomes a master of timing anyway, just in a different tempo. If you're sleepy, you can think about the grip itself, because the grip is the whole relationship between a hand and a tool. Imagine the handle wrapped in something that doesn't slip leather, maybe, or a braided strip of hide, something that feels warm quickly because it holds heat and oils. Imagine the way a hand learns its shape. The thumb settles. The fingers find their familiar positions, the way they do on a mug you've held 1,000 times. The hammer is heavy, yes, but heavy doesn't always mean distant. Sometimes heavy means dependable. Heavy means the world listens when it lands. And when the handle is short, you don't need to reach to control it. You keep it close, as if it belongs near your ribs, near your breath. There's a mildly modern thought here that doesn't ruin the mood, because it's quiet and a little ordinary. A short handle is like a compact tool you keep in a drawer for small fixes. Something you can grab without ceremony. Something that doesn't demand a whole performance. And that's the strange domestic side of a god's weapon. Mjolnir is famous for thunder, but it also carries the vibe of a tool you could actually live with. You could hang it. You could carry it. You could tuck it somewhere safe. A long handle wants a wall rack. A long handle wants space. A short handle fits into life. It can ride at your side. It can be held without making your whole posture about it. And then there's the way it changes fighting, if we were allowed to mention fighting without making it exciting. Which we are, as long as we talk about it like you talk about rearranging furniture. A short handle pulls the action inward. The strike becomes closer range. It's not the huge theatrical swing across a battlefield. It's a sudden, contained motion, like closing a heavy door. It makes the hammer feel like an extension of the arm instead of a thing at the end of a long lever. Thor doesn't have to wind up, he just moves. The hammer becomes less like a pole and more like a fist with extra opinions. And there's another odd little benefit, the kind you only notice after thinking about it too long. A short handle is easier to recover. After a swing, you don't have as much length to control on the way back. The hammer's return is tighter, quicker, more obedient. It's as if the weapon is always ready to come home, which fits the myth's recurring mood. Mjolnir returns. It always returns. It's a hammer with homing instincts. The short handle makes that returning feel even more personal, like a dog that comes back and leans against your leg instead of circling the yard. If the mind wants another tiny hook to keep it gently engaged, it can consider this. In Norse stories, Mjolnir is not only a weapon, but also a thing used for blessing. The hammer is brought to weddings, to rituals, to moments where a symbol is needed. And a shorter handle makes it easier to lift in one hand, to hold above something, to mark a space without needing two arms and a dramatic stance. In other words, the short handle makes the hammer more usable as an object in daily sacred life. It turns thunder into something that can be carried into a room. It turns a cosmic tool into a domestic ritual object, which is a very Norse kind of humor, whether they meant it to be or not. Think about the idea of a blessing tool that is also a weapon, and how the short handle quietly supports that double identity. A long-handled weapon is hard to imagine hovering gently over something without accidentally knocking over a cup. A short-handled hammer can be held close, steady, like a candle. It's still heavy, it's still serious, but it's manageable. It's a symbol that doesn't require a stage. It can fit into a small gathering. It can be carried through a doorway without scraping the frame. If you've ever tried to move a broom through a narrow hallway, you understand the advantage immediately, and you don't even need to be a god. There's also the question of how Thor himself adjusts. You can picture him learning the hammer the way a person learns a new tool. Not instantly, not perfectly, but with repetition. The first grip feels unfamiliar. The first swing feels slightly too tight. The first time he expects the long leverage and doesn't have it, he compensates with sheer strength, which is what Thor tends to do. But then the hammer teaches him. It teaches him that power can be compact. That distance is not always the point. That sometimes you win by being closer to the work, closer to the moment, closer to the thing you're trying to change. And in a sleepy way, that is the most comforting lesson of all. Not every flaw reduces strength. Some flaws redirect it. Some imperfections simply force you into a different style. They give you a different rhythm. They ask you to adapt, but not in a dramatic, life-changing way, more like changing how you hold a pen when your hand gets tired, or shifting your pillow until your neck stops complaining. The gods, for all their grandness, are still living inside practical realities. A forge's timing matters. A handle's length matters. A distraction matters. And then the next day, the world continues, and the thing that came out wrong becomes the thing everyone recognizes. If you let the mind wander through the forge again, you can see how the short handle is almost a fossil of that night's interruption. It's evidence you can touch. Proof that Loki's small sabotage mattered, even if it didn't win. That's another soft joke hidden in the myth. Loki doesn't destroy the hammer. He doesn't stop the craft. He just leaves a tiny signature, like graffiti in a corner, a little reminder that he was there. But the irony is that the signature makes the hammer more memorable. It gives it a story you can repeat. It gives it a detail that people can whisper about, the way people whisper about a tiny manufacturing error on a rare coin, turning it into something more valuable. Loki tries to diminish, and the universe responds by making the flaw iconic. A short handle also changes how you carry something heavy for a long time. With a long handle, your arm is extended, your shoulder is recruited, your whole body is involved. With a short handle, you can keep the weight closer to your center. It becomes easier to travel with, easier to rest with, easier to set down and pick up again without making a production out of it. And that matters because Thor doesn't only fight. He travels. He moves through worlds. He rides in a cart. He shows up in places where the air smells different, where the ground is not his. A weapon that can be carried more comfortably is a weapon that becomes part of you, not just something you drag around. And then there's the subtle psychological part, the part that doesn't need to be true in a literal sense to be true in a sleepy sense. A short handle makes a tool feel more personal. It sits in the palm. It responds to small shifts. It becomes something you know by touch. A long handle can feel like a staff you command from a distance. A short handle feels like something you hold the way you hold a promise. If you think of the hammer as not only an object, but a companion, something that returns, something that stays with Thor, then the short handle makes that companionship feel closer. It's not just a weapon that obeys. It's a thing that belongs. And quietly, this is where the myth becomes less about sabotage and more about craft. Brockr and Sindri didn't fail. They produced something mighty. The sabotage did not erase the quality of the work. It only nudged it. The hammer came out different, and different is not the same as less. In a forge, different can be a new standard. Different can become a feature people imitate on purpose later because it turns out to work. Different can become a style. Different can become the story's fingerprint. If you've ever held a tool that fits your hand perfectly, you know the sleepy satisfaction of it. The way your muscles relax because they trust the shape. The way the mind stops monitoring every movement. The way repetition becomes automatic and calming. Imagine Thor, god of thunder, experiencing that same quiet satisfaction, the same simple relief. This hammer fits, not in a delicate way, but in a solid way, in a way that doesn't ask him to think too hard. The world is loud enough. The hammer doesn't need to be loud in his mind. It just needs to be there, heavy and ready, like an answer that doesn't require speech. And when you follow that thought far enough, it starts to soften into something that isn't even about Thor anymore. It becomes about the way small limitations shape your habits, the way a constraint can become a style, the way you stop wishing for the perfect version and start living inside the version you have, finding its strengths, learning its quiet logic. The short handle is not a tragedy. It's a detail. It's a small turn in the story that makes the story feel more real, because real things are always slightly imperfect, and those imperfections are often what make them last in memory. So let the idea rest. Let it sit like a warm tool left near the forge after the fire has gone down. The hammer is heavy, the handle is short. The grip is close, the movement is tight. The world is still the world, full of distractions that buzz and bite and steal seconds, but the work remains. The craft remains. The lesson remains, soft and steady. Sometimes the thing that tries to ruin you arrives as something small, and sometimes you adjust so quietly that the world barely notices you've adapted at all. And then, before you know it, the flaw is simply part of the design, and the design is simply part of you. And you're allowed to rest your mind the way Thor rests the hammer close, secure, not needing a wide swing, not needing a big conclusion, just settling into the calm weight of something finished enough to keep going. There's a quiet kind of contest that doesn't look like a contest at all because nobody is cheering and nobody is counting points, and the only applause is the soft, tired sound of breath leaving someone's nose when a task finally goes the way it is supposed to. That is the kind of contest that lives inside a forge. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind. Just the steady comparison between someone who wants things to happen quickly and someone who is willing to let things happen correctly. Loki, of course, prefers quick. He prefers the kind of cleverness that can be explained in one sentence, preferably a sentence that ends with him walking away. The Forge prefers slow. The Forge prefers the kind of cleverness that can be explained without mentioning risks and heat and timing, and the fact that metal does not care how charming you are. And if you're listening from somewhere calm, if your room is dim enough that corners feel soft, you can imagine that contrast without any sharpness. You can imagine it like two styles of work sitting beside each other, the way two different kinds of people might sit on the same bench. One taps their foot and thinks in shortcuts. The other checks the same measurement twice, not because they're anxious, but because they respect the stubborn nature of reality. Loki wants the world to be a stage where words matter most. The Dwarven Smiths, Brocker and Sindri, want the world to be a workshop where results matter most. And the workshop is quietly winning because the workshop always wins. You can argue with a person, you can bargain with a god. You cannot bargain with iron that's cooling at the wrong moment. It helps, in a sleepy way, to remember how ordinary a forge can feel when you're standing in it long enough. It's not all sparks and mythology. It's tools laid where they always go. It's a surface that has been struck so many times it has its own geography, little dents and smooth spots and old burns that never quite fade. It's the scent of soot that stays on your hands even after you wash them, as if the forge wants to keep a tiny signature on you, the way Loki wants to keep a tiny signature on everything. And the bellows have their own rhythm, like a creature breathing in the dark, patient and repetitive, never impressed by anyone's personality. If Loki's genius is speed, it's the kind of speed that feels exciting for about 5 seconds and then becomes exhausting. Quick plans, quick lies, quick escapes. It's like watching someone juggle while walking backwards. Impressive, yes, but also slightly irritating, because sooner or later you can't help thinking about the mess they'll leave behind. Craft, on the other hand, belongs to slow people who finish what they start, and slow here doesn't mean lazy, it means devoted. It means you are willing to do the same small motion 100 times, not because you can't think of anything else, but because you understand that repetition is its own kind of magic, quiet magic, the kind that doesn't sparkle, the kind that works. There's a mildly funny truth hiding in this, and it's gentle enough to keep. Loki's magic often looks like changing shapes, tricking eyes, moving fast. The Forge has a different magic, and it's almost boring in comparison. The Forge's magic is temperature control. The Forge's magic is refusing to blink when it hurts. The Forge's magic is timing a strike so the metal is neither too soft nor too hard, because both extremes will punish you in their own dull, practical way. Too soft, and it deforms like an apology. Too hard, and it cracks like pride. So the smith watches the color of the metal the way a person watches the sky for rain. Not romantically, just attentively. There's a point where the glow says quietly no, and that point doesn't arrive faster because Loki is impatient. Sometimes people imagine ancient crafts as mystical because they don't know the details. But the details are what make it feel real, and the details are wonderfully sleepy. A forge is a place where tiny interruptions become big failures. A forge is a place where a single second matters, not because the story demands suspense, but because physics is extremely literal. If you stop pumping the bellows for a breath too long, the heat changes. If your hand hesitates for a blink, the rhythm stutters. If someone buzzes near your face at exactly the wrong time, your body does what bodies do, it flinches. And that's where Loki's sabotage is so annoyingly clever. He doesn't need to smash anything. He just needs to steal one clean moment from the rhythm, like taking a single page out of a book and pretending you won't notice. But craft has a stubborn advantage that trickery rarely accounts for. Craft is prepared for irritation. Craft expects discomfort. Craft assumes that something will go wrong because something always does. Heat dries your throat. Soot gets in your nose. Sweat runs into your eyes at the exact moment you prefer it not to. And the person who lives by craft doesn't build their life around perfect conditions. They build their life around continuation. They keep going. They adjust their grip. They wipe their brow with the back of a wrist that is already dirty anyway. They keep pumping the bellows, even if their forearms burn, because the work demands the same respect every day, whether or not the day feels generous. This is where the forge feels like a quiet philosophy, the kind of philosophy you don't argue about on a stage. The forge's philosophy is, you don't get to be done just because you're uncomfortable. Loki's philosophy is, if you can distract someone at the right time, you can turn their strength into wasted effort. And there's a sleepy kind of comfort in watching which philosophy lasts longer. The forge lasts longer, craft lasts longer, the hammer still exists. The trick, in a strange way, becomes a footnote attached to the hammer, not the other way around. Loki becomes an accessory to craft, which is probably not how he wants to be remembered, but it is a very fitting punishment for someone who loves attention. If you want a small modern analogy that stays gentle, you can think of it like this. Loki is the notification on your phone, the little buzz that steals your focus for half a second and makes you forget what you were doing. The forge is the person who turns the phone face down and keeps working. Not because they hate fun, not because they're moral, just because they've learned that the work doesn't care about your distractions. The work will sit there and wait for you, and if you come back too late, the metal will be cold, and you will have to start again. In that sense, the forge is not strict. It is simply honest. And honesty is another quiet difference between trickery and craft. Trickery is often brilliant, but it is rarely honest. I can't afford honesty. Honesty would slow it down. Honesty would make it sit still long enough to be questioned. Craft, though, almost always involves a kind of honesty, even if the person doing it is not especially poetic. The metal tells you the truth. The hammer tells you the truth. The anvil tells you the truth. If the blade is warped, you can see it. If the ring is imperfect, you can feel it. If the handle is short, it is short, no matter how elegantly you explain yourself. And because it is honest, craft becomes its own gentle judge. You don't need a council of gods to declare what happened. The object declares it. The object remembers. In a calmer corner of this thought, you can also notice how trickery and craft both rely on attention, but they use it differently. Loki uses attention like a thief uses a key. Fast, precise, and only long enough to get what he wants. A smith uses attention like someone listening to a kettle, steady, patient, tuned to small changes that would be invisible to someone rushing. That kind of attention is slow and nourishing. It doesn't spike your heart. It doesn't demand adrenaline. It asks you to be present in a way that is oddly soothing, because the present moment becomes very simple. Heat, breath, rhythm, color, sound, the dull, dependable ring of metal on metal. It's not glamorous. It's real. And if you were sitting near that forge, Not close enough to be bothered by the heat, but close enough to feel the atmosphere of work. You might find yourself getting sleepy the way people get sleepy when they watch someone else do a repetitive task well. There's something about competence that calms the mind. The mind stops scanning for danger because it senses, quietly, that things are under control. That is why craft is comforting. That is why watching someone finish what they start can feel like a lullaby, even if the lullaby is made of soot and patience. It's also why Loki, for all his quick cleverness, never fully wins in a place like this. Loki's moves are sharp, and sharp things stand out. But the forge is a place that softens sharpness. It takes edge and turns it into something else, something usable. It turns ore into tools. It turns rawness into shape. It turns chaos into a finished object you can hold. Loki brings chaos like a hobby. The forge handles chaos like a job. And jobs have a way of outlasting hobbies, simply because they show up every day, even when they don't feel inspired. There is tucked inside the myth a gentle invitation for you to pay attention to sensory details, because sensory details are the quickest way to make something feel real without making it exciting. Heat has a smell, and the smell is slightly mineral, slightly burnt, like stones warmed in sunlight mixed with old charcoal. Soot isn't just black. It's soft, and it clings in a fine layer that makes your fingertips feel slightly different, like they're wearing invisible gloves. The air near a forge can feel thick, not because it's heavy with drama, but because it's heavy with work, tiny particles, warmth, the lingering presence of effort. And then, somewhere in that air, a tiny buzzing persists. It's almost comical, the idea that a creature small enough to be ignored can become the most influential thing in the room. Not because it's strong, but because it's annoying. And annoyance is a strange form of power. It doesn't have to win a fight. It just has to steal your calm at the wrong moment. Yet even this, when you think about it slowly, becomes less frightening and more instructive. The buzzing is the world. The forge is your focus. The contest is not about who is bigger. It's about who is steadier. And here is the softest lesson hiding under the anvil. Craft belongs to people who return. People who return to the work after being interrupted. People who return after being annoyed. People who return after making a mistake. Loki's way is often a single dazzling moment. Craft is many quiet moments stacked together until they become something solid. And if you're still awake, if your mind is still following along like a slow boat in calm water, you can take that as a gentle invitation. If you enjoy this kind of calm wandering through myths and small details, you can subscribe or don't. The gods will not strike you either way, and I will never know unless you tell me, which feels like the most relaxed kind of relationship. What matters in this room is not applause. What matters is the rhythm of bellows, the rhythm of hands that keep working even when they sting, the rhythm of a craftsperson who has learned not to panic when something goes wrong, because panic is just another kind of wasted movement. Loki thrives on wasted movement. Craft refuses it. Craft makes everything count, even the irritation, even the interruption, even the fact that sometimes the best you can do is continue with a small adjustment and accept that the final object will carry the memory of the moment. And maybe that is why the hammer's short handle doesn't feel like a tragedy at all. Once you sit with it long enough, it feels like proof that the craft survived the trick. Proof that work can absorb sabotage and still produce something strong. Proof that even when the rhythm stutters, the rhythm can resume. And this is a very sleepy kind of hope, because it doesn't promise a perfect world. It doesn't promise that the fly won't buzz. It just promises that you can keep pumping the bellows anyway, and that the heat can return, and that the work can continue, and that something finished can still come out of the night. So let your attention soften around the idea that the forge is not impressed by speed. It is impressed by persistence. Let your mind drift over the image of an anvil that has endured countless strikes without complaint, simply doing its job, bearing weight, holding steady. Let the contrast between Loki and craft become less like a battle and more like a quiet preference. Do you want the quick thrill of destruction, or do you want the slow comfort of finishing? And you don't have to answer out loud. You can just feel it. You can let the answer settle in your body the way warmth settles in stone slowly without urgency, until the buzzing fades into the background and the steady rhythm of work becomes the only sound your mind can hear, calm enough to follow calm, enough to release, calm enough to drift. If you stay with this story a little longer, you'll notice something quietly funny about sabotages. The big ones are easy to spot because they arrive wearing boots. They knock over furniture, they announce themselves. The small ones arrive like a polite inconvenience, a tiny buzz near your ear, a speck of soot that lands in exactly the wrong place, a sleeve that catches on a corner, a thought that interrupts you right when you are finally getting comfortable. Small sabotages don't feel like villains. They feel like life doing that ordinary thing where it tests your patience with something almost too minor to complain about. And in the forge, in that warm, worked-on air, the small sabotage is literally small. It's a fly. A fly is allowed everywhere, which is one of its greatest talents. It can enter a room without permission, hover near your face like it owns the place, and then act offended when you notice it. If you think about it softly, it's almost impressive. Not heroic, just persistent. Like a living punctuation mark that insists on being included in every sentence. Now imagine that the hard part is over, not in a dramatic way, just in the way a long task slowly decides it is finished. The bellows sigh, not because they're emotional, but because they've been doing the same motion for so long that even air starts to feel tired. The iron no longer sings at that bright, sharp pitch. It lowers its voice. It becomes a quieter object again, the way people become quieter when they're finally ready for bed. The heat is still there, but it begins to tuck itself inward. The forge doesn't snap into silence. It drifts into it like a room after guests leave, still warm with presence, but steadily returning to its own private calm. The fly is still around, of course, because flies have no sense of narrative timing. If anything, it feels like it should be more respectful now, like a tiny worker clocking out. But no, it does what it does. It hovers, it considers landing, it changes its mind. It tries again. There is something almost comical about the idea that a creature so small can influence the shape of a god as weapon, and then still behave like it's just wandering around looking for snacks. That is the kind of detail mythology gives you when it wants to feel real. Not a grand symbol, but a small irritation that accidentally becomes legendary. And the Smiths, Brocker, and Sindri would not frame it as a grand moral lesson. They would frame it as a work day. They would notice the sting on the brow where the bite landed, the dried line of blood that will flake later, the way a hand feels slightly cramped after gripping tools for hours. They would notice how soot collects in the creases of skin, the way flour collects on a baker's hands, and how it never fully leaves, not because you're dirty, but because you are devoted to a craft that marks you gently. There's a sleepy sort of dignity in that. Not loud dignity, just the quiet proof that you were there, doing something real. If you've ever tried to finish a task while your body keeps offering tiny complaints, you'll understand the forge's strange kind of wisdom. The forge does not demand perfection from your feelings. It demands continuity from your hands. Your hands can be annoyed. Your hands can be tired. Your hands can be slightly irritated by a fly that thinks your eyebrow is a public space. The forge does not mind. The forge only asks that you continue, that you return to the rhythm, that you make the next motion clean. It's almost like a gentle teacher, except the teacher does not praise you and it does not scold you. It simply stays there, waiting for you to match it. And because the forge is honest, it gives you immediate feedback. This is one of the most soothing things in the world, if you let it be. So many parts of life delay their feedback, like a polite email that will not arrive until next Tuesday. The forge is immediate. The glow tells you whether the heat is right. The ring of the metal tells you whether it's true. The shape tells you whether you have succeeded. There's no guessing, no social drama, no complicated interpretation. Just a very calm reality saying, yes, like that. No, not like that. Closer, there. It's almost meditative, in the way repetitive physical tasks can become meditative when you stop fighting them. Now think about Loki, because Loki is always thinking about Loki. He doesn't love the forge's honesty. He loves attention, and attention is easier to control when things are ambiguous. The forge refuses ambiguity. The forge refuses charm. The forge refuses excuses. Even if Loki is brilliant, and he is in that quick, slippery way, he is still trapped in the truth that the object will speak louder than his story. Mjolnir exists. The short handle exists. The flaw exists. Loki's presence is etched into the final result like a fingerprint you can wash off. Which is funny, because he wanted to be a secret. He wanted to be invisible. He wanted to be clever without being caught. And the weapon itself points at him like a quiet accusation, not angry, just factual. But the myth, if you hold it gently, isn't really about blaming. It's about noticing. Noticing how often the things that derail you are not dramatic monsters, but small, almost silly interruptions, a buzzing thought, a minor discomfort, a tiny delay, a moment where you look away at exactly the wrong time. And the sleepy comfort is this: those interruptions don't have to ruin you. They can change the shape of the day, yes. They can leave a mark. They can shorten a handle, metaphorically or literally. But the work can still exist. The work can still hold. The work can still return to your hand and do what it was made to do. In a soft way, you can imagine the hammer later, not in a battle, not in a thunderous moment, but just resting, heavy, quiet, in the corner of Asgard, maybe on a shelf that was reinforced twice because somebody remembered the last shelf that didn't survive. There's a faint humor in that too. Gods might be immortal, but furniture still has a breaking point. The hammer sits there like a compact truth. It doesn't need to pose. It doesn't need a speech. It just exists with its short handle, with its stubborn weight, with its promise that it will return when thrown, like a tool that insists on coming back to the person who uses it. And the forge, after the work is done, becomes a different kind of place. The air cools and thins. The heat stops pressing against your skin and becomes more like a memory. The scent of iron fades into the background, replaced by that dry, smoky calm that lingers when something has been burned responsibly. The anvil remains, of course. The anvil is the most patient character in the room. It has no lines. It has no dramatic arc. It simply stays. If you think about it, it's the most comforting presence. It doesn't chase you. It doesn't demand. It doesn't surprise. It is a steady surface in a world full of quick changes. And the fly, because the fly deserves its own strange little credit, eventually gets tired too. Not because it understands consequences, just because even tiny bodies run out of energy. The buzzing becomes less insistent. It drifts farther away from your face. It turns into a background sound, like a distant appliance that you only notice when it stops. There's a gentle lesson hidden there, if you want one. The distractions that feel enormous in the moment often shrink when you stop feeding them your attention. They don't always disappear. They just become less important. They become part of the room, not the center of it. If you let your mind wander into a very mild modern comparison, you can think of the fly as a notification that keeps popping up when you're trying to focus. You don't need to smash your phone. You don't need to throw it into the sea. You just need to give it less of you. Turn it face down. Let it buzz quietly without obeying it. And the forge, in this analogy, is the part of you that keeps returning to the rhythm. The part that says, gently, we can keep going. We can continue. We can make the next motion clean, even if we were interrupted. It's a comforting thought because it doesn't ask you to become perfect. It doesn't ask you to become unbothered. It doesn't ask you to become a person who never flinches when something annoys them. It only asks that you become the kind of person who returns. You return to the breath. You return to the task. You return to the calm. And if you don't return quickly, that's fine too. You return when you can. That is the quiet oath hidden in the story. Not an oath of heroism, but an oath of steadiness. An oath that says, even if something small tries to ruin your rhythm, you can find the rhythm again. And the funny part is that Loki, in his own unwilling way, helps teach this. He shows you that sabotage doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like distraction. Sometimes it looks like a tiny inconvenience that tricks you into abandoning the work. Loki's favorite victory is not breaking the tool. It's making you put the tool down. It's making you stop. And the softest, sleepiest form of resistance is simply continuing. Not angrily, not dramatically. Just continuing, like bellows continuing to breathe, like hands continuing to shape, like patience continuing to exist even when it's slightly irritated. So imagine the forge cooling into a dark hush. Imagine the bellows resting, their leather slack, their wooden handles still. Imagine the last faint heat fading from the coals, not vanishing, just settling lower, like a candle that decides it has done enough for one night. Imagine the anvil sitting with its calm, battered face, holding the memory of countless strikes the way stone holds the warmth of the sun long after sunset. Imagine the tools laid down where they belong, because craft, unlike trickery, loves a proper place for things. A hammer on its hook, tongs on their peg, a small brush for ash that looks humble and necessary, like a toothbrush for a myth. And in some quiet corner of all this, the short handle waits. Not in suspense, not in anticipation, just waiting the way objects wait, patiently, heavily, like a truth you can pick up later. The hammer doesn't rush you. It doesn't demand a performance. It simply remains available, ready to return when called, ready to do its job without commentary. And the world, even a world full of gods and tricks, becomes briefly simple. A room cooling, a sound fading, a mind loosening its grip. If you're still listening, you can let your own small sabotages become less threatening too. The stray thought that buzzes near your attention, the tiny discomfort in your shoulder, the slight impatience that tries to convince you to solve everything tonight. You don't have to solve anything. You can just notice it the way a smith notices the color of metal, and then return to the rhythm that keeps you steady. Breath in slow, breath out softer. Let the distractions exist without promoting them to emergencies. Let them be flies in the room, not wolves at the door. And if the story feels like it's ending, you can let it not end. You can let it drift. The forge can keep cooling. The anvil can keep resting. The fly can keep wandering lazily through the air, less and less important. The hammer can keep waiting in the dark, compact and quiet, with its short handle and its stubborn promise. And you can keep settling, not toward a conclusion, but toward that gentle place where attention becomes smooth, where the last little buzz fades into the background, and where your mind, like a tool laid down carefully, can finally stop working without guilt and simply be still.